Starting us off tonight are Dr. Wendy Osefo. She's an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins School of Education and a political commentator. Eli Stokel's the White House reporter for the Los Angeles Times, and Chuck Rocha. He's a Democratic strategist and author of the book Tio Bernie, the inside story of how Bernie Sanders brought Latinos into the political revolution. Thank you all for being here. Wendy, I want to start with you. What does it say about Republicans that Democrats had to take it upon themselves to hold this vote tonight, which we are still keeping an eye on to see how it turns out?
It says exactly what most of us know. You know, the Republican Party really has to do its own self-reckoning here, because what is going on with Representative Green is something that we have seen time and time again, where people are putting, you know, their party over what is right. And it does not make any sense. And I don't think that it's continuously should be put on the, foot of the Democratic Party to be the moral compass of this country. This country has to be able to save itself without the Democratic Party trying to take the lead. And we have our flaws, but my goodness, this woman has continuously done stuff. And the fact that she is getting applauded while other people who stood up to the president for doing things that are wrong, one of them being leading the insurrection, are being questioned on their role in the party. That's a double standard, and one that needs to be evaluated.
Exactly. And it also feels, Eli, like it's going to be impossible to do anything in the House of Representatives after this. I mean, you're talking about one part of a party, a large portion of a party that doesn't believe in the democratic process right now. I mean, they wanted to overturn the election. Let's be clear about what the insurrection was about. So how do you do bipartisanship after this?
Well, I don't know that you do, and I don't know that you were ever going to get that in a House conference with this kind of Republican faction of pro-Trump Republicans like Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz kind of, controlling and feeling like they have the ability to challenge the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, on something like getting rid of the number 3 Republican in the House because she voted for impeachment. And in this case, lambasting everyone because they, had the audacity to suggest removing someone who espoused violent, nonsensical conspiracy theories and racism, to remove that person from a committee. They did that, as Nancy Pelosi pointed out, to Steve King a couple years ago. Steve King was obviously a white supremacist and a racist, and his views were abhorrent. And the reason, she asked this question rhetorically, what's different now? The difference here is that this member, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has a relationship with the former president, with President Trump. And that is a person who, Republican leaders are still very fearful of because of the hold he has over a lot of voters that they believe they still need in the fold if they're going to have any chance of retaking a majority in 2022. Never mind how they may alienate other swing voters that are also critical to winning back a majority. But there is a fear of triggering and upsetting the president down in Florida. And this member has a relationship with him. She said that she'd been invited to go down to Mar-a-Lago and see him. And it just feels like this is a party that is just not capable at this point of weeding out the really toxic elements, the conspiracy theories, the lying, the racism, because that's a bedrock part of what some voters that they believe they need believe in. And rather than telling those people that those things you believe in are not true, and rather than trying to rein them in, we had a couple weeks ago a lot of Republicans saying, well, my constituents think that the election was fraudulent. So none of these lawmakers want to tell them the truth. They're just going to, let them wag the dog and basically go along and do as they say. It's really dangerous, and it does leave the Democrats essentially as one party that is willing to sort of stand up for norms, and another party that's too afraid to do so.
What does it say about the Republican Party that they can't stand up to a president who's been impeached twice and who's no longer in office and doesn't even live in D.C., Eli?
Well,
he can't even tweet.
He can't tweet, but he still, he is still a sort of, a major force in the party. And they are afraid to cross him. They are afraid, 45 Republicans last week tried to throw out impeachment, including a number of them who believe that it's warranted and it's deserved. And those people who voted maybe, would have voted different if it was private. Why did they vote that way? Well, Mitch McConnell doesn't want to lose, a quarter of his caucus the pro-Trump quarter of his caucus and make himself a target of President Trump, because even without Twitter, there's still a healthy amount of fear. And the incentive structure on the right is such that it doesn't incentivize policymaking or bipartisanship. It incentivizes driving these wedges of grievance, playing to the culture wars, sucking up to Trump. Those are the things that help you raise money from this segment of the Republican base. Those are the things that are getting you invited on Fox News in prime time every night. That's the incentive structure on the right. There is not much of an incentive in terms of just pure politics, even for leadership, to really draw a line in the sand against the former president.
But Chuck, to that point, it feels to me like, if you're going to run for elected office, why are you there? If all you're going to do is suck up to a president who's not the president, you're not going to pass any laws that help the American people, and you believe crazy conspiracy theories about the Democratic side. Why are you there if not to pass laws? I thought that's what Congress is supposed to do. It feels like they have the wrong mindset.
Zerlina, what you say makes way too much common sense. And in the old days, like 10, 20, 30 years ago, folks did come to Congress from that. And we'd figure out middle grounds on lots of things and be a lot more commonsensical, if you will. And Donald Trump turned all that on its head, though. And pack a little bit about what your two talented guests just talked about is we're moving into an off-year election. In a presidential election, we had almost 70% of our electorate vote. In an off-year election, we're lucky to get anywhere near 50. So you reduce the universe of folks actually participating. And in these congressional districts, there's only about 380 of them that are all safe Democrats or Republicans. So the only way these folks can ever have anybody beat them is in their own primaries. So what they're doing, again, is sucking up to Donald Trump. And what he can do, Zerlina, to answer your great question that you just answered, he snookered people after the election and raised another couple $100 million where he could take that money to run primaries against anybody who crosses him. So what you see over there is a bunch of weak-minded folks who are scared to stand up for basic decency because they're worried about a primary opposition in an off-year election. That's what this whole thing boils down to.
And the problem that I have with that reality, Wendy, is that people are dying, right? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. And I feel like the everyday traditional political calculations, like I have to take this position because I don't want to be primaried, I feel like you may need to set that aside in a moment where there has been armed insurrection in the middle of a pandemic that has taken nearly 500,000 American lives. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, in many ways, represents just how far we've fallen from the ability to have our government respond to the needs of the people. And I mean, her quarter apology reminds me of how some Republicans used to be like, when they were asked if Obama was born in the United States, they'd sort of look at the camera with a wink and a nod and say, well, I take him at his word. And then in the next sentence, they would call Obama a liar. So it feels to me they have a lot of self-work to do. I mean, how do we get out of this habit that we have to both sides it like Marjorie Taylor Greene did today?
Yeah, those are great points. And there's this mantra that goes, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And that's what we're seeing here. Even when wrong is clearly wrong, they will continue to fall in line simply because that is what they need to do to be coddled, to be accepted by their party. And unfortunately, what we are seeing with Marjorie Greene is exactly what has been transformed through the Trump presidency, so to speak. Whenever something happens in this country, whether it's Charlottesville, whether it's the insurrection, or even, the killing of George Floyd, the first thing that you often hear is, this is not who we are. And you often hear elected officials say, this is not who we are as a country. But these same elected officials will then give a wink, a nod, a pat on the back to someone like Marjorie Greene. If this is not who we are, then don't tell me that, show me that. Marjorie Greene should not represent us if that is not who we are. So it's this talking out of both sides of their mouth, as you mentioned, like even with Obama, when they asked about, do you think that he was born here? They say, I take him at his word. But then on the flip side, they go and say something split behind his back. The same thing, we're seeing that time and time again. So I think that the problem here is the fact that people are playing political football, and it's not just Democrats and Republicans. It's millions of Americans who are dying. and millions of Americans who will die, and their lives are the ones that are being put on the line. So it goes beyond just, this rhetoric and just this table surfaceness of Marjorie Greene and saying, she should be part of a committee. No, people are dying. And since people are dying, we need to do better. And we have to stop saying this is now who we are when we continue to put people in positions that reflect the very principles that we do not like as a country.
Yeah, we have to stop saying that for sure, because every single time we say it, it's like a month later, the same thing happens. And we're like, this is not who we are, thoughts and prayers. And I'm like, guys, we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Maybe we should try to change our behavior. Dr. Wendy Osefo, Eli Stokels, and Chuck Rocha, thank you all for being here today and for that discussion.